amazing. Sorry about the camera work. I don't know if you guys can tell, but Rafael Nadal is hitting the ball around the net rather than over it, and he's got to hustle to get there. Not something you see every day, so I wanted to share it with you guys right off the bat. Here he is winning the match. As I record this voiceover, the 2020 US Open is being held in isolation due to COVID. So this will be my first time since 2014 that I'm not actually on site doing the big screen stuff with Van Wagner. I had a ton of footage shot in 2019 because I was going to make this whole big vlog about the event. But I think I'd rather just show you guys this hallway deep within the depths of Arthur Ashe Stadium that I've always loved and I've always wanted to share with people because it's just a good kind of outline of like the history of the event. And it's also a really interesting look at how trends in graphic design have changed over the years. As you can see, this hallway down here is lined with all of the past designs of what seem to be programs for the event, something I assume you would get as a fan that you could take home as a souvenir. So this is the first one from 1978. It was the inaugural event. They just built that stadium, so I'm sure that's why they picked the photo. Pretty simple text treatments. I like the way the red text sits on that darker green background up at the top there. Let's look at 1979 here. The same sort of idea with the photo of the stadium as the driving visual element, only this time we're inside of a fully packed stadium on a day clear enough to see the New York skyline in the distance. Those factors all lining up for a photo are either a beautiful coincidence or there could be some type of photo manipulation going on here. Using the multicolored crowd as a backdrop for the text was a little less clean this time around, so that's probably why they added that white stroke to the blue text. 1980, and you can see things got a lot more designy. This is the first time we see this really loud orange color that becomes prevalent throughout the early part of these designs. John McEnroe's photo there, he won it the year before, so this is the first time we'll see a player involved in one of these. That really heavy drop shadow behind the text is definitely a sign of the times too. And this is 1981. You can see they pulled back some of that colored graphical madness and we're back to the full photo with this, excuse me guy, and this technique where we're putting the player over top of the text, which is a pretty fresh element at the time. I'm not sure if this is done with a computer or we got someone sitting at a drafting table, cutting out photos with an X-Acto knife, but certainly an understated and classy look for the time. Which brings us to 1982, and at first glance not so bad, but if you look a bit closer you can see that someone in the design department was gifted a brand new computer with some image software that contained a posterized filter and saturation controls, and that was the hot thing, man, so they went for it. Luckily only for 1 year. Here we are in 1984. And to me, this is the strongest design we've seen yet. A really nice mix of color and photos, no distracting drop shadows or crap all over the text. The color contrast is doing all that work that makes it pop. And obviously you can see that they're starting to break out of this idea that things have to sit on a flat plane. Putting everything on a slant gives the composition a feeling of excitement and movement that we haven't really seen up until this point. And that's a stylistic idea in designing graphics for sports that persists even now. It's not really surprising to see these same ideas show up in 1984. They were onto a pretty solid direction at this point, and after the visual madness of the early part of the decade, you might say this design incorporates a lot of the best ideas from that time. This is 1985, and yeah, they went off in a new direction. The pink text over a red shirt direction. Now, I don't want to be critical, but this is probably the worst of them all. The photo isn't that great, the text is unreadable, and none of the colors complement each other. It actually kind of hurts to look at. In 1986, this one I like. The text layout almost moves with the player. None of the colors are too loud, and I love the contrast between the muted greens and orange of the text. I especially like the incorporation of this rainbow gradient up top here. Based on the rest of the design, there doesn't seem to be a reason for it except to add a little splash of color to everything. And the way it's positioned, I think, achieves that really well, because you might not even notice it up there at first. Okay, 1987, lots to talk about here. One of the things you'll notice right away is that we're no longer focused on the players in this design. This one's all about the fans. We're also seeing a drastic shift with regards to the introduction of graphical elements. First of all, the tennis ball, which we'll see grow and develop over the years to become one of the most recognizable design elements of the US Open. I should also point out that this organic looking paintbrush effect, along with the way it sort of reveals the negative image of the tennis ball, this is a look I'd associate more with the 90s style of design, so I feel like they were sort of ahead of the curve here. 1988, here's another drastic visual change and kind of a theme that we'll see a few more times throughout the years. Not really a photo, not really graphics, but the first time we're seeing something that you could consider like artwork. I'm not really sure if this is a commissioned piece or anything, but I think it's a really fresh way of thinking considering all the other ideas that have been tried up until now. You'll also notice that the US Open font is now something that's a little more organic looking, almost handwritten, and it complements the artistic vibes of the main visual element pretty well. Okay, 1989. Simple, clean, bold. I usually have a thing about designs that sit on a solid white or black background. Unless it's part of the brand, you kind of run the risk of looking like you don't have any real ideas in your design. I wouldn't say that that's the case here. You can see that they're bringing back that negative tennis ball paintbrush graphic, and whether that's consciously part of a larger branding plan, it's hard to say just by looking at this, but I do like that it's a little more of a highlight of this design, whereas in 1987 it was kind of like a secondary element, and here it's taken over. Okay, we're into the 90s, and this design is certainly headed there aesthetically. I feel like this might be another commissioned artwork, but you can see things are looking a little more rough around the edges, a little less perfect. The straight lines and blocks of color and hard, strong edges of the past are definitely out of style now. And you'll notice that the tennis ball makes another appearance. I'll stop pointing it out now, because it's here to stay. I'm going to go a little faster through the 90s here because you'll start to see a really consistent theme of like highly conceptualized artistic styles and a lot of really bright colors, but a little more refined and easier on the eyes than you saw in the 1980s. I'm sure there's a lot of reasons for this, but I think I'd equate it mostly to the wider availability of computer design software and really just a larger volume of designers refining the state of the art beyond just doing things because they could. So the industry advanced, the colors are still there, the funky stylized artwork and typography is all still there, but all of it is just cleaner and more refined than it was in the previous decade. I'm going to quickly stop in 1997 here. This was a huge year because they opened and dedicated the new Arthur Ashe Stadium, which was, of course, named after the winner of the first US Open back in 1978. Another colorful 90s commissioned piece here, this time showing off the new stadium. While we'll still be seeing quote-unquote artwork from here on out, nothing going forward will be quite as bold or vibrant as this one. 1998. This one looks almost out of place or unfinished, and although it's definitely not one of my favorite designs, it's the first look we get at something that could almost be considered Art Deco, and that's a style direction that will heavily persist throughout most of the 2000s and 2010s. At least it will in these US Open designs. This is also the first time we're getting a look at the iconic flaming tennis ball logo, which is one of the primary branding elements for this tournament and will be for like the next decade and beyond. Okay, 1999. They did something here. You can see that Art Deco influence creeping in a little bit, especially in the artwork of the city back there. It reminds me of Fritz Lang's Metropolis. 2000, they went with the multi-box. It's cool they brought back some player imagery, but much like a black or white background, this just looks like they didn't have any real ideas. 2001, we're back to another very highly stylized piece of artwork here. As you can see, this once again is incorporating those Art Deco vibes, especially in the font, and the artwork itself featuring this very obvious female form is almost Picasso-esque, and I feel like the presence of any actual player imagery at this point in the life cycle of these designs is not really all that necessary. Everything you see in these designs over the next decade is concerned with selling the experience of the tournament and the location rather than who you'll actually see playing there. It's also nice to see these years finally start to follow a consistent stylistic direction, and although it does start to feel a little tired after a while, by the time we get into the 2010s, it feels like the event and the look are one and the same. In 2015, which was my second year at the US Open, it was pretty well established that Serena Williams was the most dominant woman in the sport, and after winning the tournament the previous year, I can see how this felt right. It also is a beautiful callback to those earlier designs, and it's a good example of how effective photo or footage selection and that human element can feel more powerful and relatable than all the graphic design in the world. Here we are in 2016. I guess the men felt left out, so back to the multi-box look. This is also the year they added a retractable roof to the stadium, so you can see that in the photo on the bottom there. So just lots of messages to get across this year. 2017 was the 30th anniversary of Arthur Ashe Stadium, and as you can see, they kind of revived that 1997 design. Super colorful, super stylized. I think this was a great choice. 2018 was the 50th anniversary of the tournament, and you can see the number 50 incorporated into the seams of the tennis ball here. An interesting idea, but I feel like it's kind of hard to make out unless you're really looking for it. And that brings us to 2019, and the most recent update to this hallway when I recorded the video, at least. This is a direction I love, the iconic and ever-present tennis ball bursting at the seams to reveal something that even after all these years hasn't been fully represented in this hallway. And that's the excitement of the personalized fan experience. This artwork gives the impression that these people are cheering because they just saw something amazing happen. It doesn't matter who did it or what it is, the court in the middle there is clearly empty, but at the US Open, you'll be there and you'll be a part of it. Okay, everyone, that's all for this one. Thanks for sitting through all that if you did. I've been walking down this hallway for years, and it seemed like this was a pretty good way of sharing something like this and getting all of these thoughts out of my head, finally. Feels good. I'm going to leave you with this quote from Arthur Ashe, and he meant it as not only tennis advice, but life advice in general. And I think it also applies really nicely to, like, creative pursuits, too. So, thanks again. Thanks for your likes and comments and supports. Cheers, folks.